Good Shabbos. So it is now my great pleasure to get to share a little bit of Torah. And this week, I think I'm going to try to keep it a little bit on the short side, just because I hope that some of you will come join us tomorrow morning for Torah study, where we get a little bit deeper into all of this. But as we started to share before, right, this week's Torah portion, Truma, is one that's famous for the building of the tabernacle. Not like the actual building, just the first time the idea is offered, right, where God says to Moses, I want you to turn to the people and ask them to build for me a sanctuary so that I may dwell amongst them. And one of my favorite midrashim, one of my favorite stories about this is that we're told by the rabbis that at the moment that God said to Moses, hey, I want to come live with you all, right? I gave you the Torah, and Torah is dear to me, and I want to now be able to come down there and live amongst the people. We're told that Moses looked at God shocked and said, God, don't you fill the entire universe? Isn't there no space in existence that isn't filled with your presence? What type of structure are we talking about here? What do you want me to build, right? Like, how could I build a sanctuary, a space that could contain you, God? You fill everything. And you can imagine Moses here, like kind of looking at the contract, thinking about like the subcontractors and just how much this building is going to cost if it can really contain God. But God turns to Moses very quickly and says, no. It's going to be 20 boards on one side by 8 boards on the other side, right? I'm not talking about some big, huge palace. That's not what I'm talking about in order to be able to create a space for me to dwell within the community. We're taught that this Mishkan, this small space, 20 boards by 8 boards, that it is a direct response to the golden calf. We haven't actually quite got to the golden calf in our readings yet. The rabbis argue a little bit about exactly how the Torah portions work out chronologically here, but the golden calf is coming in the next few weeks, I promise. And we're taught that the Mishkan, the building of God's sanctuary here amongst us, is a direct response to the golden calf. And it makes some sense if you think about it. The golden calf is a moment where the people turn to Moses and God and say, we want something we can see. More than that, we want something that we can surround, that we can look at, that we can make the center of our community and say, that thing over there, that is God that freed us from Egypt. That thing over there is God that is taking us into the promised land. We want to be able to actually see it, to center our lives around it. And so God, in the creation of the Mishkan and the creation of the tabernacle, offers something similar, but importantly, very different. For God offers them a building that they will build in the center of their camp, a building that shall be the dwelling of God. Yet the space in it, the Holy of Holies, that is where God, supposedly the Shekhinah, the divine in our world dwells, comes to sit, is a spot that paradoxically only one Jew, the high priest, gets to see only once a year. The people say after the golden calf, we want to see God, and God seemingly says back to them, I'll give you a space that you can see me, but only one of you and only once a year. It's not quite satisfactory. What is this that God is really giving them? The Kedushat Levi teaches us that the community of Israel, us, the people, are the limbs of the Shekhinah, the divine presence in this world. The people back then, Moses' people, they weren't ready for it. They couldn't quite understand, but hopefully you can understand this. That when God says that we should create a space for God to dwell amongst us, God literally means within our community. The community as a whole, as a living, breathing embodiment of the divine presence in our world. That's what I was saying towards the beginning of tonight. We used to think the sanctuary, the temple, that's where God came to dwell, and then we came to show up. The Kedushat Levi teaches us it's we, when we show up, we are that sanctuary that dwelling place for the divine. So when you start to think about it this way, the gifts that we give our community, whether that's a hug, whether that's a kind word, whether that's a dish for potluck, whatever it is that we bring into this space, it becomes not a way of us serving God. Our prayers here are not our service of God, but become literally the way we experience the divine. So that as I sit here and I listen to Cantor Mayan sing the prayers, it's not that she and I sing together and our voices go up to the divine. The singing there in that moment is me hearing the divine. Because my voice, as it comes out of a body that is part of the divine body. When Cantor Mayan's voice comes out, it comes out of a body that's part of the divine body. And so if you understand what they didn't understand back then, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, this thing that sits in the very middle of the community, this thing that is the space that God dwells in, that only one person can see only one time a year. It's not that God dwells in that space. It's that the community surrounds that space. And that when the community surrounds that space and thinks about that space and wants to enter into that space and offer honor to that space, they start to do good things for each other. I've told you guys many, many times that when we think about the tabernacle, when we think about the temple, we should understand that holidays back in that time, they were huge barbecue parties. People brought what they had, food, love, their time to make something, and they offered it to each other. And that brought God into that space. When Moses initially hears from God this desire for God to dwell amongst us, Moses fears how big that space could possibly be. How could you ever create a building so large to allow the thing that fills the entire cosmos to dwell within it? What we now understand is that to create a space for God in our lives really just means that we need to create space for one another. If we create space for one another, if we interact together as a community, then we'll see literally the divine within our midst. Good Shabbos.
Yeah, sure.